Thank you all so much for joining us today for our session, Money and Politics. We have three amazing speakers and guests joining us here today. I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves briefly, starting with Mario.
Well, thank you for being here. Happy Martin Luther King Day, everyone. Again, my name is Mario Rosser, and it's a pleasure to be able to spend King Day with Student Dream. I grew up coming home to eviction notices on my front door, but I relate so much to this organization because I had the opportunity to escape economic confinement through education, through Columbia University, where I attended and studied economics. Today, I'm a partnerships manager at LinkedIn, the professional networking website, which when I was a student in high school and college, I used so much to be able to access economic opportunity personally. Beyond my business career, today I'm a candidate for city council in my neighborhood of Central Harlem, where I'm running to ensure that after this crisis, we're able to keep people in their homes, keep Harlem a mixed income neighborhood. We invest resources in youth development and leadership development, and that we rebuild the economy in a way that's equitable and that we don't balance this budget on the backs of our Black community. So great to be here with you all.
And Rachel?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Rachel Atkins. I am currently a assistant professor and provost postdoctoral fellow at the Stern School of Business at NYU. I have a PhD in public and urban policy from the New School. I'm originally from Philly, so I'm a little biased in my feelings towards New York because, I'm from Philly. I study Black entrepreneurs and Blacks in organizations, particularly Blacks in tech. I've done some recent work on the PPP program and opportunity zones, in addition to looking at how the last recession, the Great Recession, that was preceded by the housing bubble and burst, impacted Black entrepreneurs. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to this discussion.
So I'm David Clunie, and I am the executive director of the Black Economic Alliance. It is a coalition of Black business leaders who came together to improve economic outcomes for Black folks, with us acting on both political action, public policy, and engaging with public and private sector leaders. And I came to this role, I've been in economic empowerment and economic policy my whole career. Most recently, I was at JP Morgan Chase as a managing director in the corporate responsibility group, leading the state and local government relations team. Before that, I had been an Obama appointee at the Treasury Department, the US Treasury Department, worked for two Treasury secretaries there, Jack Lew and Tim Geithner. And before that, was a lawyer, started my career at a law firm here in New York called Paul Weiss, and went to the White House as an attorney and came out of the Howard University School of Law. And I'm extremely excited to be with you all. Went to the State University of New York at Albany undergrad, and excited to be spending King Day with you all as well, and look forward to getting into the conversation.
Awesome. And I am Chaneal Conway. I am the Chief of Operations here with Student Dream. Been working with Student Dream since early last year. We're in 2021 now. So early 2020. I have about 10 years of experience in nonprofit, just like Rachel. I'm from Philly as well. So I have a lot of biases also. So keeping focus on Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, which is we use his work at the forefront here of Student Dream. Just going to start off with one of our favorite quotes from him. So he said once that every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. And so for me, as a nonprofit leader, that just keeps in my mind, like once an issue, you've been exposed to an issue, I'm committed, right, to fix it, especially as it sees fits to the Black community. Growing up in Philadelphia and growing up in a mixed social economic background, from my neighborhood to the church I was raised in, I saw a lot of disparities and problems that could be fixed, and that I always had the passion to do so, which is what I'm doing here at Student Dream. All right. So I want to welcome all of our participants, and we're just going to get right into it. We have a few questions, and then we'll have Q&A, and then we'll just have a brief announcement for the participants that are just joining us, welcome. All right, so this question is for all of the panelists, okay? Can policy really impact the racial wealth gap, the economic disparities in Black communities, and how? And we can start with David.
So I appreciate you asking that question, and even your quote from Martin Luther King. And one of the things I learned at Howard University School of Law, Charles Hamilton Houston was the dean of Howard University School of Law when Thurgood Marshall was a student there and his mentor, and he coined this phrase that all of us learn and take with us as we leave, which is a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And similar to your quote, it's for those of us who learn things that can be helpful to those around us, we have a responsibility to use them to be helpful. So I think with public policy, I think a lot about, the answer is absolutely yes. Public policy impacts the racial wealth gap, and it has over time. And I think it's important that we know our history of how we got to where we are. One of the reasons that Black folks have 1/10 the net worth of white folks, and particularly that there's such a gap in wealth, is how wealth has been built and passed on over time. And I think about public policy, I think housing is one of the easiest ways to draw a connection between public policy and the wealth divide in the United States, particularly based on race, the Black-white wealth gap. You think about after going back from slavery, obviously, and right after slavery, Black folks just not being given a fair opportunity to work and attain property and money at the same rates. But even going forward to after the Great Depression, I'll give one example is the 1934 Housing Act, which was one of the pieces of the New Deal, wrote into the Federal Housing Administration, which it created, underwriting guidelines that the federal government was prohibited from giving government-backed affordable mortgages to Black families or in Black neighborhoods. Over the next 30 plus years, 98% of those loans went to white borrowers, and essentially created a path to the middle class. The same for the GI Bill, was one of the fastest paths. Housing and small business were two of the fastest paths to the middle class, and Black folks were categorically kept out of that. So you think about what that's meant. If 98% of loans for over 30 years are being given, affordable loans are being given to white families to start building wealth, and they do, and pass that wealth down in the way of either property or cash over time, what that has meant exponentially over time for Black folks. I think of our task at the moment to be the opposite of that, is to look at the history of public policy in the United States, how that has created and reinforced wealth disparities, and how we can deliberately counteract the effects of that by being very deliberate in saying, let's carve out and direct resources to the places that are in most need. And I think that's what a lot of the work that Mario and Rachel are doing, and that the Black Economic Alliance is doing, is targeted at. So the answer is absolutely yes. Public policy impacts the wealth gap, and I think we have a responsibility to make sure it impacts it more positively.
I could sort of piggyback off of what David just shared about the essentially redlining, right, and how that has had an impact on the racial wealth gap. Some of the work that I've done recently looks at the relationship between housing disparities and disparities in entrepreneurship, and the just the connection between the ability of folks to use equity in their homes for business loans. And so I've done some work that examines how, if and how the racial gap in entrepreneurship can be linked to racial differences in home assets. And the short answer is yes. And the interesting thing about one of the pieces of analysis that I've done recently is just, sometimes you can look at the differences between Black and white populations and just sort of attribute all this to the fact that, Black people have less assets than white households, and we can see the ramifications of that. But even when you control for the amount of home equity that Blacks and whites have, so if you take a Black household and a white household that have the same amount of home equity, for example, the probability of starting a business is substantially less for Black households. But it's not due to like a lack of entrepreneurial spirit. We have a lot of data that shows that Blacks actually over-index in terms of doing the type of activity that is needed beforehand to start a business. So something like 2 to 3 times as many Black households sort of engage in that kind of activity to indicate that they want to start a business. But the problem is getting over that hump and actually entering into the market. And so what the data I think says contrary to that is that even when you look at Black and white households that do have the same amount of resources, Black households are still facing barriers to entering into entrepreneurship. And so in addition to just changing the amount of resources that people have, I think that there are some things that policy needs to speak to ensure that Black people have the same access to the system, whether they have the resources. And who are those gatekeepers that are giving people access to capital? Who are the gatekeepers that are allowing people to use the resources that they do have to participate in the system? And holding them accountable to a lot of the laws that we have in the books to try and curb discriminatory behavior. So in addition to helping to build wealth, I think, you know, even if, for example, there's a lot of talk about reparations, if we give more resources to Black people, we have to make sure that we can use those resources to engage in the systems that others do at the same rate. And so making sure that those pathways to engaging in our systems, whether they be the banking system or whether they be just, you know, participating in the market economy to the same degree, we need to make sure that policy is aimed towards making sure that we have access to that as well.
Yeah, and you know, I'll just say that the role of government in creating and maintaining a vast racial wealth gap is undeniable. Whether we're talking about redlining or whether we're talking about disinvestment or whether we're talking about the prison industrial complex that has created barriers to reentry for so many folks in our community, it's been crucial. But in the same way that government has deliberately maintained this vast racial wealth gap, government can play, and public policy can play a huge role in creating opportunity. And at the end of the day, that's why we must be engaged in the political process, because at the end of the day, it's about what we choose to do together. You know, we're entering a new period in Washington where we have a progressive majority, but that still doesn't guarantee that our community is going to be targeted on the national level. But you know what? If Washington isn't going to do what they need to do on behalf of our community, here in New York, where Black people are 25% of the population, where Latinx people are 25% of the population, we can do what we need to do. New York can do what we need to do. Harlem can do what we need to do. Whether we're talking about making sure that as we go into this year where we're going to be electing a new mayor in New York City, who probably will be the mayor for the next 8 years, and 75% of city council seats are going to be up for re-election. We make sure we maintain the focus on social justice that we focused on all 2020 and translate that into actual public policy, whether we're talking about strengthening the clauses that New York City has around providing contracts to Black-owned businesses. We have a minority and women-owned business enterprises program that governs the city contracts that provide billions of dollars each year to companies. In that MWBE program, the B is lowercase, not enough Black dollars going to Black communities. So there are a lot of specific things we can do. And that's what this is all about. We have to stay engaged and we have to stay activated.
All right. Now, the second question is, what active, tangible role can we play in driving Black wealth development?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. In addition to that contracts program, which when you think about the advocacy and anything that happens in public policy, these are years and decades of work going in to make these things happen, right? Black advocates played a big role in creating the MWBE program in New York City, right? And I know people on this call are from all over the country, but whether we're talking about New York or whether we're talking about Atlanta or Detroit, each community has similar narratives around what's happened. But if you look at where the dollars are actually flowing in terms of that program, Black folks, 2 to 5% of those dollars are going to our community, right? In a city where you have 25% of people who are Black, right? And so there's a huge gap between the work we put in and the benefit we're getting. And a lot of that is around political leadership that is Black, that is willing to say that we need to take a deliberate and targeted approach to the systemic inequity that our community has made. Beyond the minority and women-owned business enterprises program, another opportunity that we have to impact specifically here in New York is expanding the Black Entrepreneurship Initiative. Over the course of this summer, we saw companies such as JP Morgan and Microsoft announce billions of dollars in targets to be able to focus on supporting Black businesses and getting contracts to Black businesses and hiring Black workers within the next 5 years. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to do that. The role that public policy and people who are elected and people who are interfacing with government has is the convening authority of government to hold private enterprise, the philanthropic community accountable to actually execute these things versus just saying them. The money is there. We need strong leadership and strong political leadership to actually hold a cross-functional community together and accountable to actually do what they say they're going to do. And I think that's the moment we're in right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll say, I think we have to proactively start to talk about where we are, where we're not. And I think metrics is an important way to do that, and looking at the reality of what all actors, private, public, and nonprofit sector have, what role they've played in creating and reinforcing the wealth gap, and kind of everybody taking responsibility to use their platform to counteract that. And I think about statistics like the reality that only 1% of venture capital finance goes to Black borrowers. I think that ticked up to 2.4 or 2.6 last year after the influx of investment in Black communities. And also even an organization like JP Morgan Chase that I came from, and I know the conversations they were having inside about trying to do more business with Black, particularly business borrowers, but even individual borrowers. But the reality is the financial system has been set up in such a way that Black folks not only don't have access at the same rate, but there are just multiple barriers to us achieving access or getting access. And the reality is, even a bank like JP Morgan Chase that has made all these commitments still has, from 2012 to 2018, I'm not breaking news here, only 2% of their loans, home loans in the South and West sides of Chicago, in Chicago, were given to Black borrowers on the South and West sides of Chicago. 80% of those loans were given in wealthy white neighborhoods. And that's to say, left to their own devices, these systems will continue to disadvantage people of color, Black folks, and underserved communities. So we have to be very deliberate about proactively, one, calling out the problem and looking at the reality of where we are, and two, creating programs that directly counteract the impacts and legacy of systemic racism.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about more recently is how can we innovate our way out of some of the problems that we have. And I do a lot of work that looks back at sort of how we got to where we are, but thinking more about sort of what's on the horizon and how can we take advantage of that, rather than going back and trying to sort of fix existing systems, which sometimes feels like a heavy lift. How can we make it so that Black folks benefit disproportionately from what's on the horizon? So, one of the things that we found when we examined the PPP lending program was there's this sort of bifurcation, because there was the first round of funding, which, disappeared like that because SBA chose to go through existing banks primarily as the way that we lended money to small businesses. When the second round of funding was authorized, a lot of energy was spent in sort of expanding the SBA approved lenders that could provide loans to small businesses. So you had two groups that I think made a significant difference. One was FinTech, and the other was CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions, which are generally nonprofit lenders. And there's a paper out there that sort of shows that there was substantially less racial discrimination in lending by FinTechs than there were by the traditional banks during that second phase. And the paper that we, myself and two co-authors, Lisa Cook from Michigan State and Rob Siemens at NYU, we found a substantial difference in the sort of disparity in loan amounts to Black versus white small businesses during the first phase and the second phase. Some of the analysis suggests that actually in the second phase, where there were all these other types of lenders providing funds to Black and other businesses, that disparity it virtually disappears. Now, there are some issues in the data that SBA made public. There's a lot of missing information on race, but for the businesses that actually did provide their race, we see that disparity really dissolve. And so I think that if we are able to utilize the technologies that are coming down the pipe in terms of financial lending and some other things, and sort of get in ahead of the curve to make sure that they're giving disproportionate, quite frankly, access to Black and Brown communities. I think that's one way that we can really begin to make some headway instead of trying to sort of be backward looking and get these existing, longstanding institutions that are sort of set in their ways to try and make changes when there's all these entrenched interests. More attention should be made to sort of like, where are we going in the economy and getting ahead of the problem. That's just something I've been thinking a lot about lately.
You. So our next question. At Student Dream, we emphasize the importance of building not only your financial capital, but also knowledge, network, and experience, since those drive wealth. You built a lot of of that during your time in college. So looking back, what's something you wish you were told or you wish you listened to as you moved from high school, which was eons ago for me, high school to college, and then from college to the professional world?
Rachel, I feel like we should go first here. I feel like I keep jumping in and mansplaining.
I appreciate it. The first thing that comes to mind for me is math. Had I known then what I know now, I would have been more aggressive about pursuing math courses in college. I did that in high school, and then I didn't do it in college. So I was, we have this awful tracking system in schools, and so I was sort of tracked into the middle level, sort of on grade level math track. And myself, in consultation with my parents, I wanted to be able to take some advanced math courses in high school, and so I enrolled in community college in one of the summers between 10th and 11th or 9th and 10th grade, I can't remember. And I took sort of college level algebra so that I could get into the next track to make sure that I got to take AP calculus and different things like that. But then when I got to college, I was like, oh, I already have these credits, cool. So I didn't sort of pursue more math in college, and going into, I decided sort of late in my collegiate career that I was really interested in economics, and seeing how much math folks who went to graduate school for economics had actually been taking in comparison to the amount of math that I had taken. I ended up then having to play catch up, and sort of one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't get a chance to take some differential equations and real analysis and some of these things that would have made me not only more competitive, but more knowledgeable about sort of some of the economic models. I think about that a lot in terms of tech, because I'm studying more racial disparities in tech. And while I don't think that the knowledge gap or the education gap is the whole story there, I think that there are a lot of other things going on to explain why we don't have as many African Americans in tech fields. I do think that, taking as much math, learning about computer science, there's going to be a point, I think, in the future where those things are going to be so much more infused into lots of careers, even careers we're not thinking about right now, that having that foundation is only positive. So I really would encourage even things like statistics and data visualization for people who aren't as into math, but those might be more interesting ways to sort of get involved in things that will have a direct sort of path to the tech and knowledge economies. I would really encourage students to maybe pick up an extra stats course, or pick up like a data analysis or data visualization course. That'll serve you really well.
Yeah, if I had it to do over again, I think I'd be more focused on experiential learning and doing more externships, studying abroad. A lot of the intangibles from undergrad, from college in particular, or just school, high school, college, and law school, were what you learn outside of the classroom and what you learn from being exposed to it. And I had this mentality that I had to figure out exactly what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I had to take the right classes and be on the right track. And I think what I look back at now is the opportunity to try different things and learn what you like by, and don't like, by doing it and trying it, and not putting so much pressure on yourself to figure out the right course, from your first year in college. Try different things. And the benefit there is you'll start to create networks of people and experiences that you'll carry with you for the rest of your career and be a more well-rounded professional. Instead of saying, I took this one course of study my entire career, and this is the one thing I know. Sure, good to gain expertise, which I think I did in the law and public policy and politics, but I wish I had done things like extern at the New York State Assembly when I was an undergrad in Albany, study abroad and do a Spanish immersion in a Spanish-speaking country for a semester, or even taking time off between undergrad and law school. So I think it's experiential learning and exposure is what I would emphasize more in my education if I had to do over again.
Yeah, I'll end here. I think I'm the most recent graduate. So I would say I was at Columbia, and I actually really had a great college experience, which I think was driven by trying a whole bunch of different things, and being here in New York, the best city in the world, and and uh, and just really being grateful to be there. But if I had to do it over again, I would say three things I would consider. Number one, when I was in college, I don't think that, looking back, I had as much of an appreciation as I do now looking back, that this is really truly a time for you to, where your really only expectation is to be academic, right? At the end of the day, you're a student. And when you graduate, learning continues, of course, but in my experience, the focus on execution elevates exponentially when you graduate in terms of actually operating and getting results done. At the end of the day, when you're in college, the number one job you have is to learn and be a student, and that's an incredible opportunity just to be able to focus on learning, right, and studying and clarifying your ideas and perspective on the world, reading all the books you can. Man, when I was in college, I was focused on execution then, and so I would say if I had to do it over again, man, just really becoming even more academic than what I was. Number two, I would say on the same note, one thing I did do in college, I did start a few nonprofit initiatives, but looking back on it after graduating, I ended up joining the tech industry. Right now, especially for young Black entrepreneurs, this is a time unlike any other to start your own initiatives and get your businesses off the ground. And really, the responsibility level that you have in college is nothing compared to what's going to come. So this is an opportunity, I think, to take an intelligent risk and maybe start a business enterprise that can actually start building you some capital and equity. And I would say I would do that again. And then the third thing that I would mention is actually what David mentioned, but so I'll double press that. And although I did study a foreign language in college, Arabic, I didn't go study abroad in an Arabic speaking country. And I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but I think that's something that I probably should have done, and study abroad. So those would be my three recommendations.
If I could just piggyback briefly off of what Mario just said about starting initiatives. One of the things that I don't think we see, or we see a disparity in sort of college entrepreneurship programs and initiatives and startup competitions and so on, because there's a sense that when you're in college, there may be this being able to start a venture might be this sort of like luxury good, in the sense that students who are more financially well off tend to have more of an opportunity to do that, because they might be less likely to be spending their time, doing work study or working in addition to their studies, or just access to things like being able to utilize friends and family for a round of funding or so on. And so to the extent that students are able to, speak with folks who are in those offices that serve student entrepreneurs about how to make it work, and sort of maybe get those folks to do some more of the heavy lifting to help students of color participate, because it is substantially harder for most students of color in universities to participate in those programs because of the extra burden that they're carrying for their education. And so that's something that I think students can take a little initiative on, but I think we as society and academics need to think about that a little more too, about how we can make sure that those college-based programs for entrepreneurship aren't just another way that we're giving more resources to kids that already have those resources. So yes, I encourage that, definitely, but I also think we need to find ways to make sure that we're not placing additional burden on students of color when they want to take that route during college.
And oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to add something additional about the company you keep and surrounding yourself with people who either are doing things or have done things that you want to do. And I can think about ways that I've done that in college and law school, but it's an important thing to kind of immerse yourself in an environment among people who can essentially say, this is how I got to where I am and this is what I've done. And even things like when I was in law school, I went to an HBCU for law school, and a number of us had never played golf before. And we said, this may be something we need to figure out. So a bunch of Black dudes start going out to a golf course in DC, learning how to play golf because we thought it might help us throughout our career. And it's been extremely helpful. So I think things like that, where you are thinking about the intangibles of what will put you in position to be more successful in the future, think about the people that can help get you there, and seek out, the input from folks who have done it before.
Well, thank you. And this is our last question. It's actually a rapid fire question. So we've all been experiencing the conditions of the pandemic for almost a year now, believe it or not. And so here at Student Dream, we love music. So our last rapid fire question is, what's one song on your Conquering the Pandemic playlist?
I'll answer that one. Look, I'm gonna keep it 100. Nipsey Hussle got me through this pandemic. Nipsey has a lot of good songs, and obviously a lot of people posthumously acclaim Victory Lap and recognize that was a classic. But prior to Nipsey dropping Victory Lap, Nipsey had a lot of fire. A lot of mixtapes people haven't even listened to. And one mixtape is called Mailbox Money. And on that, he has a song called Overtime. And man, look, there, obviously I said I'm a candidate for political office. It's very tiring, but I put Overtime on and I'm ready to go no matter how I'm feeling, no matter what's happened that day. So go ahead and play all the slept on Nipsey mixtapes and albums.
Looks like Rachel's looking through her phone to figure it out. There's been a lot that's gotten me through, but there's a song that takes me back to a time. It's 8 Minutes to Sunrise by Common and Jill Scott. And it takes me back to a time when I was seeking initiation into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which I will mention.
What's up, Fred?
There you go, Fred. It's the same fraternity that good Reverend Dr. Brother Martin Luther King had the wherewithal to join back in 1952. But that is a song that just makes me think about, kind of going through a hard time and the promise of what's on the horizon. So that's something that I've often gone back to and just kind of tap into a time when I've gotten through something that is way harder than, anything I'm going through currently, but also helps you appreciate that other people are going through a hard time. So we all kind of need to come together and get through it.
Since you brought up the Good Reverend and this is MLK Day, I'm gonna go. To be honest, I have a lot of gospel on my playlist, and it's been a time for me where I had our second child during this pandemic. Trying to have my 4-year-old at home while we're getting work done, and then adding another. It's been a lot, and I've been at the end of myself a whole bunch during this pandemic. And so quite frankly, I've had to draw on strength from somewhere other than me. And so I'm gonna just say the song that it's got a heart next to it in one of my playlists. It's called Waymaker. And I've had to look for somebody else to make a way for me and rely on strength from God during this and put my hope in Jesus, to be honest, because I think that at the end of the day, there's a little bit of a sense of sometimes we just don't have it. And I think that sometimes we need to let people know that that's okay. And I had a lot of people during this pandemic kind of give me that message to let me know, like, this is a crazy time. If you don't have it all together, that's okay. And so I would go with Waymaker and just some of the other good gospel. Got some Fred Hammond, and so I go old school. Some Hezekiah Walker in here too. But yeah, that's what I've been listening to get me through the pandemic.
All right, so we, and I apologize, we're so short on time. I have time for one question. So if there's any attendee here who like to ask the one question, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for informing us today. I was wondering if you can talk about some ways that college students and young people can spread the word about how to lower the black white wealth gap, or how we can do that in our own lives.
And if one speaker could just answer the question.
If either of you have ideas, I was going to think out loud, but feel free to take
Go
it.
ahead, brother.
I don't think there's a perfect answer for this, but I think it's educating yourself about the realities of what opportunities we have. I will say, for one, I learned a lot about how far behind Black folks were with respect to access to capital, wealth attainment, wealth generation, and passing it on. So I think just learning about where we are currently, but also a lot of the things that that Rachel talked about with respect to building a new economy. I think looking at folks like Robert Smith, who another good alpha man, who is doing a lot to talk about. He's the richest Black man in America, Black person in America, but he talks a lot about how companies can be using their resources and everybody can be using their resources to drive more opportunity and capital to Black businesses, to Black people. One of the things he talked about was making every private sector company commit to investing 2% of their business either in Black banks or in Black businesses. Um, so I think it's just making yourself more aware of the information that's available about where we are and where we should and could be going. So I think just starting to talk about money among you and your counterparts will put you far ahead of where many of us grew up, talking about money is grown folks' business, and we just don't talk about money and wealth in the household. So I think you and your friends beginning to talk about that and the different ways you can impact wealth creation for Black folks will be a huge step forward.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our Money and Politics panel. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the attendees as well. If you can make your way over to the Come Up Money stage, we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Mike Siebel, waiting for you all. Have a great day.